Welcome back to This Day Live, this Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. Now also joining me in the studio now to speak on the same subject of crude oil theft, crisis in the oil and gas sector, which this station has been focusing on the whole week. He's a maritime expert, Dr. Mubarak Ibrahim Mahmood. Dr. Mahmood is a public servant, author, and convener of the Conference on Supply Chain of National Competitiveness. Good to have you, Dr. Mahmood. Thank you very much for joining us on This Day Live, this Sunday talk show. Well, let me ask you, you are a navigator. You have been in the maritime sector for many years. You've worked in other areas. Okay, it looks like it's your colleagues who facilitate this stealing of Nigeria's crude oil. So, why is it that every time we hear 20 Ghanaians, some people from Britain, some people from France are stealing Nigeria's crude oil? As a navigator, as somebody in that maritime sector, what did you observe? Who are those Nigerians who make it possible for other people colluding with our own people to steal our oil?
Thank you very much, Dr. Abati, for having me. And good evening to viewers. You will notice that I was smiling the moment you begin to present the challenge.
Maybe you too got part of the oil.
Yes, that because I'm a maritime expert, I'm an oil and gas expert, supply chain person, perhaps they are my colleagues that are possibly facilitating some of these acts. Perhaps from one end, one can say it could be true, and perhaps on the other hand, one could say it's not true. But however it is, definitely some level of knowledge around the industry is required before you can be able to carry out such, an anti-economic activity. Yes, why is it always the Gulf of Guinea when it comes to missing oil or piracy or some sort of criminal activities? And why has it been that for all this time, all of this had been going on and we are unable to find a lasting solution to it? I think there are more questions that we're having all this while than answers. And that means that possibly maybe some people are not doing what they are expected to do properly, and that could be responsible for where we are today. Now, the Gulf of Guinea is a very wealthy Gulf among the Gulfs we have around the world, and it's stretched across about 10 West African countries, down up to Angola, and it has a lot of economic activities going on within it. 75% of these economic activities that goes on in the Gulf of Guinea happens within the perimeter of Nigeria's territorial water. What that means, I think, mathematically, is that Nigeria accounts for 75% of oil and gas exploration going on in the Gulf of Guinea. So, and also, what that means is that Nigeria accounts for about 60% of the entire area. So then, it means that Nigeria have more mandate, economic mandate, security mandate within the Gulf. So, and that gives us some sort of relevance and leadership position when it comes to providing, common solution to problems around the Gulf. Okay, now, I think the last time I did some academic research work around the industry, that was after I left the Gulf of Guinea in 2017. Virtually most of the oil fields in the Gulf of Guinea are areas where I have worked, mostly with multinational deepwater service providers. In some cases, we even participated in high-level technical operations that requires evacuation of crude oil in the oil fields, whether in Agbami oil field, whether in Bonga oil field, whether in Aminam, whether at Sea Eagle, whether at Odudu, whether at Usari, whether Usabo, and Ubit, name them. Ibok, these are all areas that stretched from the western flank of the Gulf down to the eastern flank of the Gulf, including areas like Excavus, where we have the EGP3 gas project. All right, from 1970 down upward to 80s, 90s, around early 90s, by early 90s, most of the oil exploration in the onshore have gradually moved onshore. Most of the investment I think we have into the industry happened around 1995. So now, it was believed then that most of the challenges the IOCs, claimed they were facing in Nigeria, which had to do with community-related problems, would no longer be there. But I think they forgot to do something. You see, you cannot build infrastructures onshore and without giving the government of Nigeria what are your strategic plans for the late life decommissioning of those assets. Should those assets attain their utilization threshold, what do you intend to do with them? It's another economics on its own in the oil and gas industry, right? But because it's an expensive venture, most of the oil majors did not want to go into that discussion. And unfortunately, we were faced with governance problem in our oil and gas industry. The National Oil Company then, as it were, have a lot of governance issues that did not give them the competency and the ability to look at these major oil producers and tell them these are our strategic plan within 10, 15, 20, 30 years into the utilization of most of these assets that today are currently used for oil bunkering in the Niger Delta. Are you seeing that? So then it means someone somewhere have not done something right. And that is why we find ourselves in this situation. So now, moving away from the onshore activity into the maritime domain. Now, should you want to steal oil in the maritime environment, it's much more difficult. It requires a heavy investment in assets. You require a ship to do that. You require a crew to do that. You require some level of security guarantee in form of clearance. Whether or not the security agencies that are in charge of this security clearance are aware or not, and I think it's also another question that I think Nigeria as a country that owns this entire process wants to answer. If should the government agencies that are possibly in charge of providing a clearance for a ship within the Nigerian domain tell the Nigerian people that we are not aware of the presence of this ship within our environment, then it means also something is missing within that.
Well, Dr. Mahmoud, I mean, you are not just a practitioner, you are also a scholar of this subject. You've written a number of books
Yes.
on the maritime sector.
Yes.
Right? So where is the problem? Because what we hear all the time is that there's collusion. Navy colluding, military colluding. In fact, some people have concluded that the biggest thieves are the military officers and the other agencies who are supposed to monitor the maritime zone. Now, what are the academics doing? You have written 2-3 books on the subject. Is there a knowledge gap? How do we address that knowledge gap? Because people can't just be stealing the crude oil. I know the people in Niger Delta, they say it's our own, but it belongs to all of us. So the more they steal the crude, the more we have issues in the bigger Nigerian community.
Okay.
Where is the knowledge gap?
Okay, fantastic. Before we even get to the knowledge gap, the military institution cannot be the thieves that are stealing the crude oil alone. You see, I beg to disagree, because when an institution or when a system has failed, we quickly always look for where to drop the blames or transfer the blames. Okay, if there are perhaps some 1 or 2 maybe cases where you've had some officers at their own discretion decide to go outside their discipline or their doctrine to say they want to do something that is detrimental or harmful to the country's economy, cannot give us that, sense of entitlement to generalize and say, oh no, everybody within the military or the entire, armed forces is responsible for this. I think morally that is not right. However, I would like to look at it from this perspective. Yes. Can you imagine if today we have statutory government agencies in Nigeria that are mandated to take care of the maritime domain? Can we imagine if those...
We have NIMASA.
Yes.
Are you saying NIMASA is not working?
No, NIMASA have launched, I think, a project called the Deep Blue Economy. And I think that Deep Blue Economy, it's a very, very capital-intensive project, and it's a project that will be implemented in phases. And I think part of the element of that Deep Blue Economy would require that a capability for the surveillance of the maritime entire stretch of the Gulf of Guinea, the Nigeria territorial part of the Gulf of Guinea is a key element of that. But whether that particular Deep Blue Economy have been able to complete the implementation of the architecture to put in place such a massive capability. And that capability would look like something that has to do with, deployment of Earth observation technologies, geographic information system, where you have these Earth observables and the geographic information system integrated, and it gives you an eagle view of whether if you like, switch off your AIS. I know that the automatic identification system on a ship is a basic identification, equipment, electronic equipment that allows, either a coordinating center or an MOC, Maritime Operation Center, or another shipboard station to be able to monitor and locate the movement of a ship. You can switch it off as you care. That would not stop the surveillance to be able to identify that a strange movement is happening.
So are you saying that the technology that the Nigerian authorities told us they deploy may not work?
No.
It's not working.
It may work, but the components are not complete. Here are the components.
Oh, they bought fake technology.
No, the technologies are not fake. They are original. But when you have like 10 different components for a system to be complete, but maybe just like I told you, implementation could be very slow. Perhaps, most of these technologies are not owned by Nigerians. You may not know behind the scene what are the limitations the agency is facing in terms of the procurement of this technology from the proponent of these technologies. They could be given them. I think we recall when Nigeria was about to procure Super Tucanos. We knew that there was a president of the United States of America that blocked that. Eventually, the other one came and okayed. So I think, again, this tells us that we must begin to learn how to do things on our own. And that is where the education comes in. But before I go into the education, the component that would make a whole maritime domain of a country efficient, effective, and active. Number one, right from the approach to your seaport, you know, the world has gone beyond just using buoyage systems when a ship is approaching, a port of call. We have, an electronic system, VTS, where you have traffic separation schemes on the approach of your water. And that VTS would allow, for a degree of security monitoring right from the approach. Then while the external surveillance system will be integrated with that VTS, then vessel traffic system, right? The external surveillance that looks like what the Nigerian Navy has, the Falcon Eye. The Falcon Eye, according to the Nigerian Navy, would allow, the surveillance of our entire maritime domain. So what we are now saying is that, you see, when we now have the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, right, we're housing, some of this surveillance system, then we now have the Nigerian Navy having its own Falcon Eye. Then we now have the Nigerian Port Authority having, a functional traffic separation scheme, in the port limits. Then you now have a functional VTS integrated with that traffic separation scheme. Then that VTS integrated with the entire surveillance being warehoused by Nigerian Navy and integrated with that of the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency. You can now then begin to see a marriage. You can now then begin to see a high-level collaboration among these agencies. Then that is when you can now then begin to see real data, because most of our security problems are driven around data.
Okay.
So now, then...
Dr. Mahmoud,
yes.
What I'm hearing is that there is no data, there is no coordination, there is no synergy. All these Falcon High, VTS, whatever that everybody is doing. All the security agencies in the maritime sector, they seem to be operating in silos. That's why people can come, steal crude oil, organize high technology and theft, and then get away with it. And then why is it that when they intercept these Buccaneer vessels, they just destroy them? They destroyed the MT Heroic Idon that was stealing our crude on the coast of Equatorial Guinea. This new latest one, they also destroyed it. So why do they keep destroying the evidence? Is it because some people, a cartel is trying to cover up? Why is it that the Falcon Eye cannot see all these things and prevent it?
This is what I'm saying. You see, some of these projects are not projects that can operate as a standalone element. They must have integrated systems, and most of this technology and satellite services are not provided within Nigeria. They are provided outside Nigeria. So the ability for the service consumer to be able to manage some of the expectations of the service provider creates some sort of limitations along the implementation of most of this project. And therefore, this is where expertise comes in. When you want to implement a project, then you must make sure that the right persons with the right mindset, with the right competencies, are allowed to drive those government policies in order to avoid what we call policy malpractices. I think by and large, most of the challenge we've been facing, whether in the oil and gas governance in Nigeria or whether in the maritime industry, regulatory framework in Nigeria, are fallout of policy malpractices. However, coming back to your question on where is the knowledge gap, I think in 2008, I remember when I visited the Bonga FPSO as a young navigator then. I was on board a French flagship. From the captain to the lowest man on the ship were all French. I was the only Nigerian cadet on that ship. I think then a single oiler who is also a Nigerian. Throughout the days we used in sailing to that location, we've been speaking French, we've been speaking, English. Eventually we arrive at the Bonga FPSO. That particular day, arriving at the oil field, the only voices of the people I hear on the VHF radios were either British or Americans. So I begin to ask a question, what exactly is going on here? A country of about close to 200 million people then, do we say we don't have youth in Nigeria? And exactly at the peak of the Niger Delta crisis, which is a fallout of unemployment, environmental abuse, and infractions by perhaps some of the oil majors. So then I begin to ask a question, is it that Nigeria do not actually have regulation, laws that would turn around this whole situation? I realize that we have the Cabotage Act of the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency. And mind you, don't forget, Dr. Abati, that our inability, our ineptitude to implement the Nigerian cabotage law. Again, you ask a question about why you continue to hear Ghanaians. Why don't you hear names that looks like my own? Since you purportedly,
all those people will quarrel.
Yes,
and Ibrahim.
And Ibrahim, because you purportedly said exactly. You purportedly said, being an expert in that industry, perhaps my colleagues are the one aiding and supporting some of this. So you see again why you continue to hear Ghanaian vessels, foreign vessels in Nigeria water. I think is a signal for us to know that, again, some very crucial and important part of our laws are already comatose and they are completely not working. Okay. So now, cabotage is missing. You continue to see foreign vessels carrying both legitimate cargo and illegitimate cargo. Are we now seeing the outlook of the problems?
Okay.
So now for
Dr. Mahmoud,
yes.
Before we go, I'm trying to manage time.
Yes.
Who is a navigator? Pardon me, I'm a layman. Okay. I'm not in the maritime sector. But I know I've studied cabotage law, maritime law. But who is a navigator?
Yes. Basically, a navigator is a trained mariner that had been given the doctrine, the training to carry a ship from point A to point B. But however, a major problem that will continue to fight our maritime industry and our oil and gas industry is that it is unheard for that Nigeria had been removing oil since 1955. And there is no single university in Nigeria that offers exploration technology or exploration management.
No, they teach petroleum law.
Okay.
They teach maritime law.
Maritime law.
They teach international trade law.
Very good.
All of which fall under this category.
Very good. Law isn't what is the major problem of Nigeria. Technicality. You remember you asked of the knowledge for shortfall and the books that have been launched. Take, for example, logistics is a major challenge in our entire maritime sector, an entire economic loop. We don't have a single university or polytechnic that can tell you they can boldly offer exploration supply chain. And it's a major sector that can...
There's no university in Okarenko.
Yes, that's a maritime university.
Yes.
So now, with the introduction of these books, the NUC, under Professor Rashid, the man that just voluntarily
Mubarak
Rashid,
yes, my colleague,
was highly impressed and had encouraged all Nigerian universities to at least consider the inclusion of this specialization into our national education curricula. So that at least we can begin to have, like, we just have the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, remember?
Yeah, I know.
By implication, what that means is that you've allowed other African countries the free, because you've signed to it, they've allowed you free hand into their own economy, and you are also allowing them free hand into your own economy. What we are now saying is that our major oil and gas sector, should they bring in expats, we would allow them freely take up opportunities that should be given to our...
Dr. Mahmoud, I get your point about the curriculum. Let me look at that book again. Although that looked like an advert, I'm going to ask Abdul Muiz to send you an invoice for advertising on our station freely.
No,
but the book says, a universal concept and system thinking approach. Logistics of explorations and industrial productions. Mubarak, Ibrahim, Mahmoud. Congratulations.
So
it's
with
not
this,
easy to write a big
Nigerians
book.
can
You want to introduce another book?
No, it's not. It's just a volume 2 of this.
Okay.
Because with this, Nigerians can go into the industry and, build the competency required.
Will people even read the books?
No, because they are meant for our universities.
If reading books will stop the problem of oil theft, all of us in the Niger Delta will be very happy.
Not necessarily.
That nobody reads. Even the policymakers don't read.
No, not necessarily by reading books. We've all known that universities are where our problems should be solved. But these solutions never came from the Nigerian universities because there is a barrier between the industry and the academias.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mahmoud, Mubarak, Ibrahim Mahmoud, oil and gas, maritime expert, academic, industry player. Thank you very much for joining us.